The first time I saw my wedding ring on another woman's hand, I was standing in the back row of a charity auction hall, holding a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold, while my daughter smiled beside the stage as if she had not sold the last piece of my husband I still wore. The ring was not large, not flashy, not the sort of diamond that made strangers gasp under chandelier light. It was a modest oval sapphire with 2 tiny diamonds on either side, set in yellow gold, worn thin at the bottom from 46 years of dishes, gardening, hospital visits, church suppers, and holding my husband's hand through the last winter of his life. I had taken it off only once since Daniel died, and only because arthritis had swollen my knuckle during a humid July week in Savannah. I placed it in the small velvet box on my dresser, beside his pocket watch, and the folded note he wrote me on our 40th anniversary. 3 weeks later, my daughter Maribel told me she had taken the box for safekeeping. That night, at the auction, I saw the ring again under bright lights, resting on the finger of a woman I had never met, while a jeweler across the room looked at me with the frozen expression of a man who had just realized he had bought a memory from the wrong person. I did not scream. I did not rush across the room and grab the woman's hand, though for one wild second my body wanted to. I stood still beneath the low hum of conversation and clinking glasses, feeling the old wooden floor of the Magnolia Arts Center beneath my sensible black shoes, and watched my daughter laughing near a table of donors. Maribel wore a silver dress, her dark hair pinned high, one hand resting lightly on the arm of Charles Vinton, the real estate developer everyone in Savannah seemed to admire because he donated loudly and apologized rarely. My son Peter stood near the bar, looking uncomfortable in his blue suit, the way he always looked when Maribel was steering the evening and he had decided silence was safer than truth. The auction banner behind them read, "Preserving Southern Heritage, a Night of Giving." I remember thinking how strange that word was, preserving. My husband's ring had been preserved on my finger for nearly half a century. Now it had become an item in someone else's story, a glittering secret passed through hands that had no right to touch it. The woman wearing it was seated at the front table, younger than me by at least 30 years, with copper hair and a black satin shawl slipping from one shoulder. She raised her hand to adjust an earring, and the sapphire caught the light. Blue fire. Daniel used to call it your little storm cloud, because on cloudy days the stone looked deeper, almost alive. I knew every mark on that ring, the tiny scratch near the left diamond from the time I caught it on the mailbox in 1987, the faint bend in one prong after I dropped a cast-iron skillet and Daniel insisted on taking it to a jeweler before I lost the stone. The engraving inside, so small I had once needed reading glasses to see it. D to L, 1976. Daniel to Lenora, my name, my marriage. My life before widowhood hollowed the house. That was my ring, and it was sitting on a stranger's hand while my daughter pretended the room belonged to her. "Mrs. Whitaker?" a voice said beside me. I turned and saw Armand Jules, the jeweler who owned a small shop on Broughton Street. He had repaired my necklace clasp years ago and cleaned Daniel's watch after the funeral. He was a careful man in his 60s, with silver hair, a trimmed beard, and hands that moved like they knew the weight of delicate things. His eyes were not on my face, they were on the ring at the front table. "Did you authorize the sale of that sapphire?" he asked quietly. The question entered me like cold water. Not, "Is that your ring?" Not, "Do you recognize it?" Authorize the sale, that meant he knew more than I did. I turned fully toward him. "No," I said. My voice sounded calm, almost distant. "Where did you get it?" His face tightened. "Your daughter brought it in." The room blurred for half a second around the edges. Maribel, my own child. The girl who used to sit on Daniel's lap and trace the sapphire with one finger while he told her, "This ring is how I found your mother in a crowded room." The woman who had kissed my cheek that morning and said, "Mama, don't wear yourself out tonight. Just enjoy being honored." Honored. I looked at the stage, where my name was printed in the program as special recognition. Lenora Whitaker, longtime supporter. My daughter had brought me to a public event to honor me, while the ring she stole from my dresser sat on a donor's hand. Armand leaned closer. "There is more," he said. Those 3 words were the true beginning of the story. There is more. Every betrayal has a visible wound and a hidden root. The ring was the wound. I had not yet seen the root. "Tell me," I said. Armand looked toward Maribel, then toward Peter, then back to me. "Not here." I almost laughed. Not here. But where else should a public lie be answered, except in the room where it had dressed itself in charity? Before I could respond, Maribel saw us. Her smile faltered, only for a second. Then she recovered, gliding toward me with that graceful urgency she used when a room needed managing. "Mama," she said, placing a hand on my arm, "there you are. We're about to start the recognition speech." Her fingers pressed into my sleeve. Warning, not affection. Then she looked at Armand. Mr. Jules, how lovely to see you. Armand did not return the smile. Mrs. Whitaker and I were discussing a ring. Maribel's hand tightened. A ring, she said lightly. How funny. Mama has always loved jewelry stories. There it was, the soft insult wrapped in charm. Jewelry stories. As if I were a sentimental old woman confusing stones with memories, as if any objection from me could be dismissed as nostalgia before it became accusation. I stepped away from her hand. The movement was small, but Maribel noticed. So did Peter. So did Armand. Sometimes dignity begins not with a speech, but with removing someone's fingers from your sleeve without touching them. Maribel, I said, why is my wedding ring on that woman's hand? Her face changed. Not guilt first, calculation. Her eyes moved to Armand, then to the woman at the front table, then to Peter, then back to me. Mama, she whispered, please don't do this here. I looked around the hall, at the donors, the auction paddles, the champagne glasses, the banner about preserving heritage, the program with my name printed as if I were cherished. You brought it here, I said, not me. Peter appeared beside us then, pale. What's going on? I looked at my son. Did you know she sold my wedding ring? His mouth opened. He looked at Maribel. That look told me enough. Not full knowledge, perhaps. Not clean innocence either. Maribel spoke quickly. I didn't sell it. I had it appraised as part of estate planning. Armand's voice was quiet but sharp. It was sold on consignment through my shop. The word consignment sliced through her sentence. Peter whispered, Mari. She turned on him with her eyes, and he stopped. At that moment, the auction host tapped the microphone. The room began to quiet. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll take your seats, we're about to begin with tonight's first special recognition. Maribel's face went still. My name was about to be announced. My daughter's lie was about to stand under stage lights. I felt Daniel's absence beside me like a chair pulled out from a table. He had been a quiet man, but he would not have let this room swallow the truth. I touched the bare spot on my left hand where the ring should have been. The skin there was paler, indented slightly from decades of gold. Personal loss is not always the object itself. Sometimes it is the moment you realize someone you raised believed your grief could be converted into money if she moved quickly enough. Armand reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded receipt. Mrs. Whitaker, he said. I kept the intake copy because something felt wrong. Maribel's eyes flashed. You have no right to discuss private business. The owner of the ring has every right, he replied. I took the receipt. My hands did not shake until I saw the line under seller information. Maribel Whitaker Cross, acting on behalf of Lenora Whitaker. Acting on behalf. Beneath it was a note. Client states, mother-approved sale to support estate liquidity and charitable pledge. Charitable pledge. I looked up slowly. The charity auction, the recognition speech. Charles Vinton, my daughter's silver dress, her sudden insistence that I attend tonight. A shape began forming, dark and precise. What pledge? I asked. Maribel's face had gone pale under her makeup. Peter looked as if he had stopped breathing. Armand did not answer. He did not need to. On the stage, the host smiled into the microphone and said, Tonight, we are honored to recognize Lenora Whitaker and the generous family pledge made in her name. Made in my name. That was the cliff edge of the first night. My wedding ring had not merely been sold. It had been used as proof of a donation I never made, to polish my daughter's reputation, tie my name to a pledge, and place me in front of a room where objecting would make me look confused, ungrateful, or cruel. I looked at Maribel, and for the first time in my life, my daughter looked afraid of me. Not because I had raised my voice. Because I was reading the page she thought she had already written. I folded the receipt once and placed it inside my purse. Then I turned toward the stage as the room applauded my name, and I knew one thing with perfect clarity. If they were going to honor me for a lie, they were going to hear the truth before dessert. The applause began politely, then grew warmer as people turned toward me with smiling faces, unaware that my daughter had just tied my name to a pledge bought with my stolen wedding ring. I stood near the back of the Magnolia Arts Center, with Maribel on one side, Peter on the other, Armand Jules a step behind me, and the receipt folded inside my purse like a match waiting for air. The stage lights washed the auction host in gold. Behind him, a projection screen displayed my name in elegant script. Lenora Whitaker, A Lifetime of Giving. Beneath it was a photograph of Daniel and me from 20 years earlier at a museum fundraiser, his hand resting lightly at my back, my sapphire ring visible on my left hand, because Daniel had always reached for that hand when cameras appeared. Seeing the ring in that photograph while the real one glittered on a stranger's finger at the front table felt like watching someone place flowers on an empty grave and call it celebration. The host continued, The Whitaker family's generous pledge will help preserve the old Caraway House for future generations. Caraway House. My stomach tightened. That was Charles Vinton's project. the historic property he had been trying to turn into a private event venue while convincing the city it was heritage preservation. Maribel had talked about it for months, saying Charles was bringing dignity back to Savannah's old bones. I had not known she planned to use mine as part of the foundation. Maribel leaned toward me with her smile fixed for the room. "Mama, just wave," she whispered. "We'll talk after." Her voice was soft, but desperation had begun to fray its edges. Peter looked at me, pleading without words, the same way he had looked when he was 10, and broke Daniel's radio, hoping silence might repair it before anyone noticed. I loved my son. That was the trouble. I loved him enough to know when he was weak. He had always let Maribel decide first and then apologized later if the decision hurt someone. But later is a cruel place to store courage. The host lifted his hand toward me. "Mrs. Whitaker, would you join us for a few words?" A path opened through the tables. People clapped again. The woman wearing my ring turned slightly in her seat, smiling with the innocent confidence of someone who had purchased beauty without knowing its bloodline. For one moment, I almost stayed still. Embarrassment rose in me like heat. Don't make a scene. Don't shame your children. Don't ruin the fundraiser. Don't be the old woman who confuses private grief with public business. That was the voice women of my generation are trained to obey. Then I felt the bare groove on my finger and remembered Daniel's hand in mine the night before his final surgery when he said, "Lenora, don't let anyone make you smaller just because you're tired." I stepped forward. Walking to that stage felt longer than any aisle I had ever crossed. Longer even than the church aisle on my wedding day in 1976, when my father's arm shook slightly under my hand, and Daniel stood at the front smiling like the whole world had finally chosen him. The auction hall quieted as I climbed the 3 steps to the platform. The host handed me the microphone with a practiced smile, but his eyes flicked toward Maribel, perhaps sensing tension behind the applause. I took the microphone and looked out over the room. Faces, donors, local business owners, church friends. 2 city council members, Charles Vinton at the front table, his silver hair shining, his fingers steepled as if he owned every silence in the room. The copper-haired woman with my ring looked up at me expectantly. Maribel stood near the bottom of the stage, her eyes wide and warning. Peter stood behind her, pale and motionless. Armand had moved closer to the aisle, one hand inside his jacket, where I knew the intake copy probably waited in duplicate. That mattered. A jeweler, a receipt, a public pledge, and a stolen ring had all followed me onto the stage. I did not need to be loud, I needed to be exact. "Thank you," I said into the microphone. My voice sounded older than I wanted, but clear. "I am surprised tonight." A few people laughed politely, thinking I meant touched. I turned my eyes to the screen where Daniel and I smiled from another life. My husband Daniel loved this city. He loved old buildings, old stories, and old promises. He also believed a person should never put another person's name on a promise without asking. The room shifted, not loudly. Just a slight movement, the collective body of an audience realizing the speech had turned. Charles Vinton's expression sharpened. Maribel's smile disappeared entirely. I reached into my purse and touched the folded receipt, but did not pull it out yet. Timing matters. After 46 years of marriage and 74 years of living, I had learned that truth enters best when the door has been opened from inside the listener. "I am told there has been a generous pledge made in my name tonight," I continued. "That is the first I have heard of it." Now the room went quiet and earnest. The host's face changed. A woman near the front lowered her auction program. The copper-haired woman looked down at her hand, then back at me. Maribel came up the steps quickly, still smiling, one hand extended. "Mama," she said, loud enough for the front tables to hear, "you're overwhelmed. Let me help." There it was again, overwhelmed. The word meant to shrink me in public before I could grow dangerous. She reached for the microphone. I turned slightly so her hand met air. Few people gasped softly. I looked at her and said, still into the microphone, "Maribel, did you sell my wedding ring to fund this pledge?" The sentence struck the room like a plate dropped on marble. The host froze. Charles Vinton stood halfway, then stopped. Peter closed his eyes. Maribel's face went white, but she recovered with astonishing speed. "Mama," she said, voice trembling perfectly now, "your ring was part of an estate planning conversation. You know how confused you've been about what to do with sentimental items. Confused, sentimental, estate planning." She had brought her own little cage with her onto the stage, but Armand Jules was already walking down the aisle. "I can clarify," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried. People turned. Maribel's eyes flashed with something close to hatred. "Mr. Jules, this is private family business." Armand stopped at the front of the stage and looked up at me. "Mrs. Whitaker, do I have your permission to discuss the transaction involving your ring?" "Yes," I said, one word, clear, public mine. He turned toward the room. The sapphire ring currently worn by Miss Celia Vinton was sold through my shop 3 weeks ago by Maribel Whitaker Cross, who stated she was acting on behalf of her mother, Lenora Whitaker. The sale paperwork indicates the proceeds were intended to support an estate liquidity issue and a charitable pledge. Celia Vinton. The woman wearing my ring was Charles's daughter. The room reacted before I could. A rustle moved through the tables. Someone whispered, "Oh my lord." Celia stared at the ring on her hand as if it had turned hot. Charles Vinton's face hardened with fury, but not at the theft, I thought. At the exposure, Maribel looked at Armand and said, "You had no right." Armand's answer was calm. "I had every right to correct a transaction when the true owner says she did not authorize it." Peter finally moved. He came to the foot of the stage, face gray. "Maribel," he said, "tell me you didn't." She turned on him. "Don't you dare act innocent. You knew Mama needed to make decisions about her things." He flinched. My heart sank. There it was again. Peter's shadow in the doorway. "What did you know?" I asked him. The microphone was still in my hand. Everyone heard. He looked up at me, shame naked on his face. "I knew she took the jewelry box," he whispered. "She said you asked her to store it because of the house repairs." House repairs. Another door opened. I had not ordered house repairs. I had mentioned once that the upstairs bathroom tile was loose. Maribel had turned that into access to my bedroom, access to my jewelry box, access to Daniel's ring. "Did you ask me?" I said. Peter shook his head. "No," Maribel snapped, "because she would have said no to everything, like always. It came out too sharp, too true." The room heard it. I heard it. Maribel heard herself and stopped. The host, poor man, tried to reclaim order. "Perhaps we should pause the program." "Yes," Charles Vinton said, standing fully now. "Pause it." His voice had the kind of authority money buys in local rooms. He turned to Celia. "Take the ring off." Celia's face flushed crimson. "Dad, I didn't know." She pulled at the ring, but it caught slightly at the knuckle. She looked close to tears, and for the first time that night I understood she was not my enemy. She was another woman placed inside Maribel's performance without knowing the script. Armand stepped forward. "Do not force it. I have solution at my shop. We can remove it safely." Celia nodded, humiliated. Charles looked at Maribel. "You told me your mother donated the ring voluntarily as part of the pledge." Donated. The word nearly buckled my knees. Sold was bad enough. Donated turned theft into virtue. Maribel's mouth trembled. She would have wanted to help if she understood the opportunity. There it was. The future consent, the imagined approval, the belief that my no could be corrected by enough pressure and staging. Whispers moved through the room again. I looked at my daughter, and beneath my anger I felt the old ache of knowing exactly where her hunger came from. Maribel had always wanted to be seen among important people. Savannah society had a way of making people like her feel almost included, then not quite. She married well enough to hyphenate her name, donated enough to be invited, dressed well enough to be photographed, but never enough to stop reaching. Charles Vinton had offered proximity, committees, donor tables, recognition, a place beside power, and my ring, Daniel's ring, had become a stepping stone polished by grief that did not make her simpler. It made her worse in a more human way. Greed is ugly, but greed mixed with shame can learn to speak beautifully. I brought the microphone closer. My husband bought that ring in 1976 from a shop that no longer exists. He paid for it over 7 months because the railroad had cut overtime and he refused to put it on a credit card. Inside it, he engraved D to L, 1976. I wore it when I gave birth to both my children. I wore it when I buried my mother. I wore it when Daniel died. I did not donate it. I did not sell it. I did not authorize my daughter to use it for estate liquidity, charity, or any pledge in my name. My voice trembled on Daniel's name, but it did not break. If this evening is about preserving heritage, let us begin by not stealing it from living women. The room went completely silent. Then someone at the back clapped once. Not applause exactly, a single sound of agreement. Then another. "Elaine from my church?" "No, wrong story. Wrong town." Here it was Mrs. Abernathy from the Historical Society, a woman older than me with a cane and no patience for thieves. She clapped again, louder. Others followed, uncertain at first, then stronger. Maribel stood on the stage steps, exposed by the very room she meant to impress, but the story did not end with applause. Stories like this never do. As the host suspended the program and people began murmuring in clusters, Armand came to my side. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said quietly, "there is still more." That phrase again. It had brought me to the edge once. Now it pushed me over. "What more?" I asked. He glanced toward Charles Vinton, who was speaking angrily to his daughter, then toward Maribel, who was being surrounded by 2 board members. The proceeds from the ring sale did not go directly to the foundation. My hand tightened around the microphone. "Where did they go?" Armand hesitated. "To a holding account connected to your daughter's consulting company." "Consulting company." Maribel did not have a consulting company that I knew of. She ran donor relations part-time for arts organizations and styled herself as a heritage liaison, whatever that meant. How much? I asked. $12,000, he said. 12,000. More than Daniel had paid for our first car. More than I spent in a year on groceries. And the pledge? Armand's voice lowered. The pledge announced tonight is 50,000. The room seemed to tilt. My ring was not the pledge. It was the first proof of money. The emotional token, the story piece. A $50,000 pledge in my name meant other assets were being implied, expected, or already promised. My house, Daniel's watch, the savings account, the small trust he left for repairs and taxes. I looked toward Maribel. She was staring at me now, and her fear had deepened into something almost feral. Peter came to my side. "Mom," he whispered, "we need to go." I turned to him. "No, we need to know." He looked like a man who had spent his life leaving rooms just before the truth became expensive. Not this time. I walked down from the stage, Armand beside me, Peter following, and went straight to Maribel. The board members stepped aside. Charles Vinton stopped talking. Celia stood behind him with her hand wrapped in a napkin, ring still stuck, eyes wet. Maribel lifted her chin. "You've ruined everything," she said. Her voice was low, shaking. "No," I said. I interrupted it. "You don't understand what this pledge meant. Then explain it." She looked at the people around us, then leaned closer. "Not here." I almost smiled. That seems to be everyone's favorite phrase tonight. Charles Vinton spoke before she could. "Mrs. Whitaker, your daughter represented that your family foundation intended to support the Caraway restoration in your late husband's honor. Family foundation." I felt Peter stiffen beside me. "We have no family foundation," I said. Charles's eyes moved to Maribel. "That is becoming clear." Maribel's face crumpled with anger. "It was going to be established." "With what money?" Peter asked. She glared at him. "With assets Mama keeps sitting on while everything falls apart." There it was, the sentence beneath the sentence, assets. Sitting on, everything falls apart. My ring was only the first item she had stopped seeing as mine. I remembered then the way she had walked through my house after Daniel died, saying, "This place is too much for you eventually." Touching the silver, the china, the framed land deed from Daniel's father, the antique secretary desk. I had thought she was grieving through objects. She had been inventorying. Charles Vinton turned cold. "The foundation board will need to review this matter." Foundation board, pledge, holding account, family foundation that did not exist. My daughter had not only stolen a ring, she had built a public identity around my supposed generosity in Daniel's memory, likely to secure her place in Charles Vinton's preservation circle and maybe more. I looked at Armand. "Can you give me copies of everything?" "Yes." I looked at Peter. "Can you drive me to Armand's shop now?" He nodded quickly. "Yes." Maribel grabbed my arm. "Mama, please." Her fingers were hard, desperate. I looked down at her hand until she released me. "You may call me when you are ready to tell the truth in writing," I said. "Not before. You're choosing strangers over your daughter," she whispered. I looked at Armand, Celia, Charles, the board members, the room still watching in fragments. "No, Maribel. I am choosing the people who showed me the paper over the daughter who hoped I wouldn't read it." Peter drove me to Armand's shop in silence. Savannah streets glowed under old lamps, Spanish moss hanging dark from the live oaks like curtains pulled over secrets. I sat in the passenger seat with my bare left hand in my lap and the receipt in my purse. Peter kept glancing at me, wanting to speak, afraid to speak, needing absolution before confession. I gave him none. At Armand's shop, he unlocked the door and brought us into the back office. The room smelled of metal polish, velvet, and old wood. He printed the consignment agreement, payment record, buyer receipt, appraisal notes, and a photograph taken at intake. The photograph showed my ring on a black velvet pad under bright white light, every scratch visible, the engraving documented. I touched the photo lightly. It was terrible how much an object can look alone. Then Armand printed the final page, the one that became the cliffhanger of that night. It was a note attached to the appraisal. Seller states additional estate items may follow pending mother's agreement. Men's gold watch, silver service, antique desk, possible property-backed charitable trust. I read it once, then again. Peter made a sound like someone had knocked the breath out of him. Daniel's watch, the silver service from my mother, the antique desk where I kept our deed and insurance papers, property-backed charitable trust. My daughter's plan had not ended with my ring. It had begun there. I sat in Armand's back office under the smell of polish and velvet, staring at the printed note, and understood the full danger at last. Maribel had not stolen my wedding ring because she needed $12,000. She had sold it to prove she could turn my memories into assets, one at a time, until even Daniel's name could be used to open doors I had never agreed to enter. I folded the appraisal note and placed it in the growing stack of papers. Then I looked at Peter and said, "Tomorrow we find the desk." The next morning, Peter arrived at my house at 7:10 with 2 coffees, a legal pad, and the face of a man who had spent the night discovering that guilt does not sleep just because the body lies down. He stood on my porch under the pale Savannah morning, Spanish moss shifting in the live oak across the street, and waited after knocking, though he still had the old key Daniel had given him years ago. That waiting mattered. After a night when my daughter had treated my belongings, my name, and my grief as items awaiting conversion, the small courtesy of being asked before someone crossed my threshold felt almost ceremonial. I opened the door and looked at my son. Peter's eyes were red. His suit from the auction had been replaced by a wrinkled gray sweater and jeans, and he looked younger somehow, as if shame had pulled him backward into the boy who used to confess only after evidence was found in his pockets. "Mama," he said, "I should have asked you when Maribel took the jewelry box." I looked at him for a long second. "Yes," I said. No softening, no rescue. He nodded, accepting the sentence like a weight he deserved to carry. "I brought coffee," he said, "and I'll leave it on the table if you don't want me inside." That was the first useful thing he had said since the ring appeared. "Come in," I told him. "But today, you do not explain your sister before we find the desk." The desk stood in the front parlor beneath the tall window, an antique mahogany secretary with a fold-down writing surface, brass pulls, and a hidden drawer Daniel adored because he believed every good piece of furniture should have at least one secret. His father had bought it at an estate sale in Charleston in 1958 and hauled it home in the back of a borrowed truck, swearing it was worth more than the truck. Daniel had refinished it during the first year of our marriage, sanding the wood by hand in the carport while I sat on a lawn chair reading pregnancy books and pretending not to be frightened by motherhood. For nearly 50 years, that desk held the serious papers of our life. Deed, insurance, tax records, Daniel's military discharge, savings bonds, birth certificates, the letter from his mother that arrived 3 days after she died because the mail in rural Georgia had never respected grief. If Maribel had listed that desk as an additional estate item, she was not thinking of furniture alone. She was thinking of what lived inside it. Peter stood behind me as I unlocked the lower cabinet. "Did Maribel know where the papers were?" he asked. I gave him a look over my shoulder. "She grew up in this house." He lowered his eyes. "Right." The folders were still there at first glance, which almost made the fear seem dramatic. Deed, insurance, taxes, Daniel estate, household repairs, medical, jewelry appraisals. But fear sharpens the eye when love has been used against you. The deed folder was turned backward. I never turned labels inward. The jewelry appraisal folder was missing the old photograph of my ring. The Daniel estate folder was too thin. My copy of his will was there, but the schedule of personal property was gone. In the household repairs folder, a recent contractor estimate had been added for bathroom safety modernization and structural updates. I had never requested such an estimate. Peter leaned closer. "Who is Low Country Heritage Renovations?" "I was about to ask you." He shook his head. "I don't know them." At the bottom of the estimate, beneath the quoted amount, was a line that made my stomach turn. "Potential preservation donor credit available if property incorporated into charitable trust project." There it was again, charitable trust. The phrase had followed us from Armand's appraisal note into my desk like a footprint. I laid every folder on the dining table and began photographing before touching more. Peter watched, then quietly took out his phone and photographed from another angle. Good, learning. The house smelled of coffee and old paper, with a faint trace of the gardenias blooming near the side fence. Morning light fell across the table in bright indifferent stripes. I opened Daniel's watch box next. The gold watch was still inside, but the small certificate from the watchmaker was gone. The silver service sat locked in the dining room cabinet, each piece wrapped in flannel, but the inventory card my mother had written in 1972 was missing. I went back to the desk and checked the hidden drawer. Daniel had shown it to both children once when they were teenagers, making a little ceremony of it, saying, "Family secrets should be harmless and well-made." Inside the hidden drawer, I kept the key to our safe deposit box, a copy of the house deed, and Daniel's 40th anniversary note to me. The key was there. The deed copy was there. The note was not. For a moment, the missing ring became smaller than that missing piece of paper. Daniel's note was only 1 page, folded twice, written in his square handwriting on hotel stationery from a weekend in Charleston. "Lenora, if I leave first, keep the blue ring on as long as it comforts you, and when it stops comforting you, pass it only with joy." That line had been mine, private, sacred. Maribel had no use for it as money, but she had use for it as narrative. Pass it only with joy. If she had that note, she could twist it into permission. She could say Daniel wanted the ring passed on. She could claim a donation, a tribute, a symbolic act. My throat tightened so sharply I had to sit down. Peter saw my face. "What's missing?" I told him. He turned away and pressed one hand against the wall. "God, Mari," he whispered. "She took Dad's note?" "She took the sentence that could make theft sound like legacy," I said. Peter closed his eyes. This time he did not defend her. We called Armand first. He answered from his shop before opening hours, his voice careful. I told him about the missing note, the contractor estimate, the absent appraisal photograph, the missing property schedule, the watch certificate, the silver inventory card. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, "you need an attorney before you speak to Maribel again. Do you know one?" "Yes, Iris Caldwell, estate and elder financial abuse. She handled a case last year involving stolen heirloom jewelry and a forged donation letter." Forged donation letter. The words fit too neatly around my fear. Armand gave me the number and then added, "Please also call your bank. If there is talk of a trust, you need to make sure no account or safe deposit access has been requested." I thanked him. Peter stood beside the table, staring at the missing paper list, as if it were an indictment written in his own handwriting. The bank call revealed the next door. My checking and savings were safe. No money had moved. But 2 weeks earlier, someone had requested information about adding a family co-trustee to facilitate charitable planning for an elderly account holder. The bank refused to provide anything beyond general policy because the caller could not verify my security word. The caller used Maribel's married name. My hand tightened around the receiver. "Did she mention a foundation?" I asked. The bank representative paused. "The note says caller asked about linking accounts to a pending family foundation or charitable trust." Peter sat down slowly. I asked for a security lock on all accounts and a note that no trust, foundation, charity, or family member had authority to request information. The representative agreed and gave me a case number. I wrote it down in large block letters on the legal pad. Peter watched the pen move. "She called the bank," he said, almost to himself. "She called everyone." I replied, "Iris Caldwell saw us that afternoon." Her office was on the second floor of a brick building near Forsyth Park, above an old stationery shop that still sold engraved invitations to people who believed paper could carry bloodlines. Iris was in her early 60s, with dark brown skin, close-cropped silver hair, and eyes that had clearly outlived many excuses. She shook my hand first, then Peter's, and when he started to explain, she held up one finger. "Mr. Whitaker, I'll hear from you. But first I want your mother's version without family translation." I liked her immediately. I told her everything: the ring, the auction, Armand's receipt, the pledge in my name, Charles Vinton, the holding account, the appraisal note, the missing documents, Daniel's note, the bank inquiry, the contractor estimate, the possible charitable trust. Iris listened without interrupting, then arranged the papers into categories: stolen property, false authority, charitable pledge, estate documents, property trust, witnesses, bank protections. "This is not just sentimental jewelry," she said at last. "This appears to be an attempt to construct authority around your assets using family status, public charity, and your late husband's memory." Peter looked sick. I felt strangely steadier. A named thing can be fought. Iris called Armand while we sat there and asked him to preserve all records, video, intake notes, payment logs, and communications related to the ring. Then she called the foundation office connected to the Caraway House restoration. A woman named Denise answered, polite until Iris introduced herself as my attorney. Within minutes, we learned that Maribel had submitted a donor pledge card listing the Daniel and Lenora Whitaker Family Foundation as the source of a $50,000 commitment, payable in stages, beginning with proceeds from family heirloom liquidation authorized by Mrs. Whitaker. I closed my eyes. Daniel's name, my name, family foundation, heirloom liquidation, authorized. Every word was a borrowed coat placed on theft to make it presentable. Iris asked whether the foundation had proof the family foundation existed. Denise hesitated. "We have a draft registration packet from Miss Whitaker Cross." "Send it," Iris said. Now, the packet arrived by email 13 minutes later. Iris opened it on her large monitor. At the top, Daniel and Lenora Whitaker Heritage Fund, proposed purpose preservation of historic homes and family legacy assets, proposed initial assets, jewelry, silver, antiques, potential property-backed contribution, proposed family advisor, Maribel Whitaker Cross. Proposed elder donor, Lenora Whitaker. Elder donor, I hated the phrase with a force that surprised me. Not mother, not homeowner, not widow. Elder donor, a role Maribel had created for me before asking whether I wished to play it. The draft was incomplete, not filed with the state, but there were attachments: a photograph of my ring, a photograph of Daniel's gold watch, a photograph of my antique desk, A blurry photograph of the exterior of my house, taken from the sidewalk. Peter leaned forward. When did she take that? I knew exactly when. 3 weeks earlier, Maribel had come by with muffins, stood near the curb after leaving, and pretended to answer a text. I had waved from the porch, pleased she had stayed long enough to talk. She had been photographing the house. Iris printed the packet. Mrs. Whitaker, we need to notify the foundation that the pledge is unauthorized, notify your bank, secure your safe deposit box, file a police report for the ring and missing documents, and send a preservation letter to your daughter. Peter spoke then, voice low. What about me? Iris turned to him. What about you? He swallowed. I want to give a statement. I knew she took the jewelry box. I knew she talked about Mom needing to place assets somewhere meaningful. I thought it was just Maribel trying to be important. I didn't know about the pledge, but I didn't ask. Iris looked at me. Do you want his statement? I looked at my son, at the shame on his face, at the first real effort to stand still inside the storm instead of leaving the room. Yes, I said, but not as apology, as record. He nodded. I understand. At 5:30 before we left Iris's office, my phone rang. Maribel. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call. Then a text. Mama, Charles is furious. You need to fix this before the foundation board ruins me. Not before you feel hurt. Not before we talk. Before they ruin me. I took a screenshot and handed the phone to Iris. She read it, expression unchanged. Do not answer. Another text arrived. That ring was supposed to make Daniel's name matter again. My vision went white at the edges. Daniel's name mattered in every room he had ever entered with quiet kindness. It mattered in the porch rail he repaired, the students he tutored for free, the church roof fund he paid into anonymously, the way he made coffee every morning before I woke. My daughter had reduced his name to a ladder into Charles Vinton's circle and then accused me of letting it fade. I pressed my hand flat to the desk until the anger steadied. Iris, I said, send the letters. That evening, Peter drove me home. Savannah's old streets blurred past the window, all iron balconies and warm lights and tourists laughing with drinks in plastic cups, unaware that grief could be stolen in broad daylight and dressed for a gala. At my house, we went straight to the safe deposit box key, then to the dresser where the velvet ring box still sat empty. I picked it up and opened it. Inside was the small indentation where the ring had rested for years. Objects remember shape, so do people. Peter stood in the doorway. Mom, he said. I'm going to tell Iris everything, even the parts that make me look bad. Good, I said. He waited. Perhaps hoping for more, I looked up. That is what you should have done before. He nodded, tears in his eyes. No defense. Another beginning, small but real. At 9:14 that night, Armand called. His voice was tense. Mrs. Whitaker, I'm sorry to disturb you. Celia Vinton came to the shop. We removed the ring safely. She wants it returned to you. My breath caught. She does, yes, but there is an issue. My hand tightened around the phone. What issue? When I inspected the ring after removal, I found residue under the stone setting. It may have been recently opened. Opened? The center sapphire may have been removed and reset. For a second, the room disappeared. Are you saying the stone might not be mine? Peter stepped closer, eyes widening. Armand was silent just long enough for my heart to understand before my ears did. I need to test it against my original cleaning records, he said. But Mrs. Whitaker, I am not certain the sapphire in the ring is the same sapphire Daniel bought. I sat down on the edge of my bed, the empty velvet box in my lap. My daughter had sold my ring. She had used my name for a pledge. She had photographed my house, listed Daniel's watch, and drafted a fund around my assets. And now even the blue stone Daniel called my little storm cloud might have been switched before the ring ever reached Celia's hand. That night ended with the worst question yet. If the ring had been returned, what exactly had come back? Armand Jules called again at 8:22 the next morning, and I knew from the way he said my name that the answer had not improved overnight. I was sitting at the dining table with Peter across from me, both of us staring at the empty velvet ring box as if it might confess if we waited long enough. Morning sunlight came through the lace curtains, falling over Daniel's watch box, Iris Caldwell's card, the printed Heritage Fund packet, and the photographs of my own house taken without my permission. The room smelled of coffee and gardenias from the side fence, but beneath it all I imagined the sharp metallic scent of a jeweler's workbench, the place where my ring had been opened, handled, and possibly changed. Mrs. Whitaker, Armand said, I compared the stone under magnification to the cleaning photographs from 2019 and 2022. I closed my eyes. Peter leaned forward, his face already pale. Tell me, Armand exhaled. The stone currently set in the ring is sapphire, but it is not the same sapphire. Your original had a feather inclusion near the lower right pavilion and a tiny natural silk pattern visible under angled light. This stone does not. It is smaller by a fraction and darker. For a moment, I heard nothing but the ticking of the clock in the front room. Not the same sapphire. The gold had come back. The setting had come back. The engraving might still be there. But the blue heart of the ring, the storm cloud Daniel chose on a rainy afternoon in 1976, because he said it looked like a sky with secrets, was gone. Peter whispered something I did not catch. I asked Armand if there was any chance it had been changed years ago during a repair. No, he said. I cleaned it myself after Daniel's funeral. I photographed it then. This change is recent. Recent. Such a small word to hold such violence. It meant someone had removed the sapphire after taking it from my dresser, before or during the consignment process, before Celia Vinton wore it at the auction, before my public humiliation became evidence. My daughter had not only sold my ring, someone had hollowed it first. I looked at Peter and his expression shifted from grief to anger so cleanly it startled me. Maribel knew, he said. Maybe, I replied, though in my heart I already feared more than maybe. Armand continued. I need you to come to the shop. Celia Vinton is here with her father. She insisted on returning the ring directly, but given the stone issue, I advised we wait for you and your attorney. Charles Vinton was there. Celia was there. The ring was there, but not the stone. I'll call Iris, I said. Then after a pause, I added, and Armand, lock the ring away until I arrive. His answer came quietly. Already done. Iris met us at Armand's shop less than an hour later. Savannah was bright that morning, the sidewalks still damp from a brief shower, tourists already drifting past antique stores and cafes, as if the city had not become a map of my daughter's deception. Armand's shop sat between a bookstore and a florist, its front window arranged with estate brooches, pearl earrings, and a silver tea service, so polished it looked almost liquid. Inside, the air smelled of velvet, metal polish, and the faint sweetness of lilies from next door. Celia Vinton sat in a chair near the counter, eyes red, hands folded tightly in her lap. Charles stood beside her, rigid with the anger of a man unaccustomed to being publicly fooled. Iris greeted Armand first, then turned to Celia. Mrs. Vinton, thank you for coming. Celia looked at me, and before anyone could say more, she stood. Mrs. Whitaker, I am so sorry, I didn't know. Her voice trembled. My father told me the ring was part of a heritage donation. Maribel said you wanted a younger woman connected to the project to wear it at the auction as a symbol. A symbol. I almost laughed, but there was no humor left in me. My wedding ring had been turned into a symbol for everyone except the wife who earned its meaning. Celia placed both hands over her face for a second, then lowered them. When Mr. Jules told me it was yours, I wanted it off immediately. I'm sorry it got stuck. I didn't know about the stone until this morning. I believed her, not because I was generous, but because she looked humiliated in a way money could not train. Charles cleared his throat. Mrs. Whitaker, the Vinton Foundation will fully cooperate. We are suspending all pledge activity connected to Maribel Whitaker Cross pending review. Iris said, Good. We will need every communication, pledge document, donor packet, email, text, meeting note, and transfer record. We will also need documentation of any representation that Mrs. Whitaker authorized the pledge, donation, family foundation, heirloom liquidation, or property-backed charitable trust. Charles's jaw tightened at the long list. You'll have it. I watched him carefully. Charles Vinton was not innocent in the moral sense. He had wanted a moving donor story, an old widow's name, a family legacy, a historic house, a ring on his daughter's hand, all the polished pieces of public generosity. But wanting a beautiful story is not the same as stealing the sapphire. He had been careless with proof because the story benefited him. That carelessness had made room for Maribel. I said, You should have asked me directly before putting my name on a pledge. Charles looked at me then, and to his credit he did not argue. Yes, he said. We should have. Armand brought the ring from the back in a small evidence envelope and placed it on a black velvet tray. I had thought seeing it again would comfort me. It did not. It looked like Daniel's ring wearing a stranger's eye. The gold band was familiar, the little diamond still there, the engraving inside confirmed by Armand's photograph. D to L, 1976. But the sapphire sat too dark, too flat, as if the storm had gone out of it. I did not touch it. Not yet. Iris asked Armand to explain the stone comparison on the record. He had already prepared photographs. The original sapphire from previous cleanings, the current stone, magnified images, measurement differences, inclusion maps, and a written statement that the center stone had been removed and reset recently. Can you tell who did it? Iris asked. Not from the stone alone, Armand said, but the work was not done by my shop. I would know. The prong marks show someone opened and closed the setting with tools that left small pressure scars, not a careful restoration. Could Maribel have sold the original stone separately? Peter asked, voice tight. Armand hesitated. Possibly. Or someone advised her to swap it before consignment. keeping the original and selling the ring as an heirloom piece. Charles turned sharply. Advised by whom? Iris looked at the packet from the proposed heritage fund. That is what we are going to find out. The answer began to appear sooner than expected. Charles's assistant emailed the foundation file while we were still in Armand's office. Iris opened it on her laptop, and the room seemed to shrink around the screen. There were emails from Maribel to Charles describing the Whitaker Heritage Fund as a family-led preservation vehicle honoring Daniel's legacy. There were draft donor pages using a photograph of Daniel and me at the museum fundraiser. There was a pledge schedule: $12, an initial heirloom contribution, $18,000 anticipated from additional estate pieces, $20,000 from property-backed family preservation instrument. Property-backed family preservation instrument. My house in a costume. Then came the name none of us expected: Alden Cross, Maribel's husband. I had not mentioned him much because Alden had always lived at the edge of things, smiling politely, checking his phone, letting Maribel take the room while he drifted behind her in expensive loafers. He worked in wealth consulting. A phrase Daniel once said sounded like a man selling umbrellas indoors. In the email, Maribel had written, Alden believes separating intrinsic stones from heirloom settings may help establish liquidity without sacrificing symbolic value. I read that line 3 times before understanding it fully. Separating intrinsic stones from heirloom settings. Liquidity without sacrificing symbolic value. My stomach turned. The fake sapphire was symbolic value. The original was liquidity. Peter's fist struck the table before he could stop himself. Celia flinched. Armand looked grim. Charles muttered, "Good God." Iris's voice stayed low. "Mrs. Whitaker, did Alden have access to your ring?" "Through Maribel," I said. "He was in my house twice last month." One of those visits came back to me suddenly. Maribel and Alden had stopped by after church with pastries. Alden had complimented Daniel's watch, asking whether it still ran. He had held it too long. I remembered feeling a little bothered, then scolding myself for being ungenerous. He had also asked about insurance on older pieces, saying many families underinsured sentimental assets. I had thought it was dull conversation. It was inventory. He asked about insurance, I said. Iris wrote that down. He looked at Daniel's watch. Peter whispered, "The watch certificate is missing." The room went silent again. Charles looked at Iris. "If Alden Cross is involved, you should know he advised our foundation informally on donor asset structures. I did not know he was connected to any stone removal." Iris's face turned colder. "Then preserve every communication with him, too." We left Armand's shop with copies, statements, photographs, and the ring still secured there. I did not take it home. I could not bear the thought of placing that altered thing inside Daniel's velvet box while the real sapphire was missing. Iris drove separately to her office. Peter drove me. For several blocks, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "I thought Alden was just useless." I watched sunlight flicker through moss-draped branches. "Sometimes useless is a costume, too." Peter nodded, jaw tight. "I'm going to tell Iris every time he came over." "Yes." He glanced at me. "Mom, I should have protected you from them. You should have asked questions," I said. Protection without listening can become another kind of control. He absorbed that quietly. I was not only speaking of him. I was speaking of Maribel, Alden, Charles, every person who had turned my life into a project without my consent. At Iris's office, the investigation widened. She sent preservation letters to Maribel, Alden, the Vinton Foundation, Charles personally, the foundation board, the contractor listed in the estimate, and the bank. She called the police non-emergency line and requested an officer come to my house that afternoon to take a report for stolen jewelry, missing documents, possible fraud, and elder financial exploitation. "The stone swap changes the case," she said. "Now we have theft of a component, not just unauthorized sale of an heirloom." I sat across from her, hands folded, feeling older than I had felt the night before. "Do you think we'll find it?" Iris did not offer false comfort. "Maybe. Stones move quickly if someone knows what they're doing. But paper moves too. And people who use elegant language often leave elegant records." That was something. Not comfort, exactly. A direction. The police report took place at my dining table, where that morning Peter and I had spread out the missing documents. Officer Lena Ortiz arrived with a calm face and a small recorder, accompanied by a detective named Sam Riley after Iris mentioned the potential value of the original sapphire and the charitable pledge documents. Detective Riley had sandy hair, tired eyes, and the careful stillness of a man who listened professionally. He asked when I last wore the ring, when I placed it in the velvet box, who knew where it was, who had access to the house. When Maribel took the box, what she told me, whether Alden had asked about jewelry, whether any documents were missing, whether any pledge or foundation had my consent. No, 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 each no became a plank under my feet. Peter gave his statement too, admitting he knew Maribel had taken the jewelry box, but accepted her explanation without asking me. Detective Reilly did not scold him. He simply wrote it down. That was worse in a useful way. Official silence can teach more than family shouting. Then came the safe deposit box. Iris insisted we check it immediately. Peter drove me to the bank, where a manager named Mrs. Holcomb took us into the vault room. The air inside was cool and dry, with the faint smell of metal and paper dust. I had not opened the box in over a year. Inside should have been Daniel's military papers, old savings bonds, copies of insurance policies, the original house deed, and a sealed envelope labeled, "For Peter and Maribel after me." The envelope was still there, the bonds were there, the military papers were there. But the insurance policy schedule for valuable personal property was missing. In its place was a photocopy, not the original, and the page listing jewelry appraisals had a faint crease as if copied recently. Mrs. Holcomb checked the access log. Only I had accessed the box in the past year. That should have been impossible. Then she looked closer. There was an inquiry about adding a deputy access holder, she said. Not approved. It came through a phone call asking about procedure. Who called? I asked, though I already knew the answer would be another door. A man identifying himself as Alden Cross, son-in-law. Peter muttered something under his breath. Iris on speaker said, "Get a certified copy of that login note." By evening, my house felt less like a home than a place that had survived a search. The desk folders were in stacks. Daniel's watch was locked away. The silver service had been photographed. The velvet ring box sat empty. Peter stayed in the kitchen while I walked room to room, looking at things Maribel had touched. The framed photograph of Daniel in his railroad jacket, the china cabinet, the antique desk, the upstairs dresser, the side table where Alden had once set his coffee. I did not feel haunted. I felt inventoried, which was worse. A haunting belongs to memory. Inventory belongs to people who plan to take. At the bottom of the stairs, I stopped before the mirror and looked at myself. 74 years old. Silver hair pulled back, bare left hand, eyes tired but not clouded. They had counted on grief, age, family loyalty, public embarrassment, and elegant words like legacy. They had not counted on Armand's records, Iris's precision, Peter's late but useful shame, Celia's decency, or my willingness to stand in a room and ask for the paper. Maribel did not call that night. Alden did. His number appeared at 8:43, and I let it go to voicemail as Iris instructed. His message was smooth, almost warm. "Lenora, it's Alden. This has gotten unnecessarily dramatic. I understand you're upset about the ring, but you need to know Maribel was trying to preserve Daniel's legacy in a way you may not fully appreciate. The stone issue is being misunderstood. Call me before lawyers turn a family tribute into a criminal matter." I played it twice. The stone issue is being misunderstood. Not denied. Misunderstood. I sent the voicemail to Iris and Detective Reilly. Peter listened with me, and by the end his face had hardened. "He knows where it is," he said. "Maybe," I answered. But my heart had already begun to believe it. The next morning, Iris called with an update that turned belief into something sharper. The contractor estimate from Low Country Heritage Renovations had not been requested by Maribel. It had been requested by Alden Cross, who told the contractor he was preparing a family preservation trust proposal and needed cost estimates for accessibility updates before possible donor property inclusion. Donor property. My home again. The contractor had also been asked whether antique fixtures, built-ins, and period furnishings could be appraised separately if the property entered a preservation trust. Period furnishings. My desk, my silver, Daniel's mother's sideboard. My life was being translated into categories by a man who had married my daughter and decided family meant access to inventory. Then Iris said, "There's one more thing." I sat down before she continued. Detective Reilly checked with a gem dealer who works with estate stones. A loose oval sapphire matching the approximate description of yours was offered for private sale last week. My throat closed. "By whom?" Iris paused. "The dealer says the inquiry came from Alden Cross." Peter, standing beside me, whispered, "I knew it." I gripped the edge of the table. "Did he sell it?" "Not yet," Iris said. "The dealer declined because Alden could not provide clean provenance." Detective Reilly is following up now. Provenance. The word meant origin, ownership, history. My sapphire had provenance. It had Daniel's overtime, my wedding day, decades of my hand, photographs, repairs, records, memory. Alden had tried to sell the stone without its story, and for once, the missing story had stopped a transaction. By noon, Detective Reilly asked me, Iris, and Peter to come to Armand's shop. He did not explain fully over the phone. "We may have located the stone," he said. That was all. I spent the drive with my hands folded so tightly my fingers hurt. At the shop, Armand, Detective Reilly, Iris, and a gem dealer named Mr. Sato were waiting in the back office. On the desk sat a small sealed gem pouch. Inside was a blue oval sapphire, not mounted, not shining under a stage light, loose, vulnerable, alone. Armand examined it under magnification while the rest of us waited in silence, so intense I could hear the air conditioner click on. He compared it to the old photographs, the inclusion map, the measurements, the tiny feather near the lower right pavilion. Then he looked up, and his eyes were wet. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, "this is your sapphire." The room blurred. Peter put one hand on the back of my chair but did not touch me. Iris was still. Detective Riley watched quietly. I looked at the little blue stone in the pouch and felt no triumph. Only grief and relief tangled together. Daniel's storm cloud had been found, but finding a stolen thing does not undo the hand that took it. "Where did it come from?" I asked. Detective Riley answered. "Mr. Sutto received it from Alden Cross for evaluation. After news of the auction incident circulated, he contacted us through Mr. Jules. He preserved the stone in communications." Mr. Sato bowed his head slightly. "The stone had no proper paperwork. It felt wrong. Those 3 words had saved the heart of my ring. It felt wrong. Armand had felt it, Celia had felt it, Mr. Sato had felt it. My daughter and son-in-law had counted on people ignoring that feeling because the story sounded elegant. But honest people still exist in small shops, behind counters, in quiet offices, looking closely at things and saying no." Detective Riley explained that Alden would be questioned, and Maribel too. The stone would remain in evidence until released. The ring setting would remain with Armand. The foundation pledge was frozen. The Heritage Fund draft was dead. My house had property alerts in place. My bank accounts were locked. The stolen papers were still missing, including Daniel's note, and that hurt almost as much as the ring. But now we knew the scheme had layers. Maribel created the public legacy story. Alden extracted value from the heirlooms. Together they used Daniel's name, my age, and the language of preservation to make theft look like tribute. Peter looked at me after the detective finished and said, "Mom, this is bigger than Mari trying to impress people." "Yes," I said, "it is. And that was the cliffhanger of that day. If Maribel and Alden had gone this far with a ring, a stone, a fake fund, and a property-backed trust, what else had they already promised in my name to people who had not yet called? That night, after Peter left, I sat alone at the dining table, with Daniel's empty ring box open in front of me, and a copy of the sapphire photograph beside it. The house was quiet, but not peaceful, not yet. I opened my notebook and wrote, "The gold was returned, the stone was found, the truth is still missing pieces." Then I wrote the sentence that would carry me into the next morning. "Tomorrow, I find out what my daughter sold before the ring." The next morning, I woke before dawn, with the sentence still moving through my mind. "Tomorrow, I find out what my daughter sold before the ring." It had sounded dramatic when I wrote it, but by morning it felt practical. Maribel had not begun with a sapphire. People like my daughter did not wake up one day and decide to sell their mother's wedding ring, draft a fake heritage fund, photograph a house, and let a son-in-law pry a stone from its setting without rehearsing smaller betrayals first. There is always a first door, a small object, a harmless question, a document borrowed and not returned, a sentence said too casually at lunch, a lie that survives because everyone wants it to be nothing. I sat at the edge of my bed in the pale blue light, my left hand bare, the empty groove on my finger visible even in shadow, and listened to the house breathe around me. The old boards creaked, a truck passed outside. Somewhere in the garden, a bird began its thin morning call. Daniel had loved that early sound. He used to say birds had no respect for grief. They sang whether you were ready or not. I was not ready. I got dressed anyway. Peter arrived at 8, this time with no coffee, no apology, no attempt to make the morning feel softer. He carried a box of document sleeves, a roll of evidence labels Iris had given him, and a small scanner borrowed from his office. "I thought we should make copies of everything before we move more," he said. I looked at the supplies, then at my son. "Good." His face changed slightly, as if that one word mattered more than comfort would have. We sat up at the dining table, where the morning light spread across the scattered pieces of my life. Armand's photographs, Iris's letters, Detective Riley's card, the Heritage Fund draft, the contractor estimate, the bank case number, the safe deposit inquiry note, the list of missing documents, and the photograph of the recovered loose sapphire. The ring itself was still with Armand. The stone was still in evidence. Daniel's anniversary note was still missing. My daughter's silence sat over everything like dust. We started in the front parlor again. This time, we did not only look for what was missing. We looked for what had been touched. That was Peter's idea, and it was a good one. If Alden was making inventory, he said, he might have photographed or moved things even if he didn't take them. Inventory. The word still made my skin tighten. We checked the antique secretary desk first. Peter photographed every drawer before opening it. I narrated because Iris had told me fresh descriptions matter. Top left drawer, stationery and stamps. Top right drawer, Daniel's fountain pen, old address book. Middle drawer, check registers, empty envelopes. Lower cabinet, document folders. My voice sounded like someone else's, calm and official. Inside the lower cabinet, behind the tax folders, Peter found a small square of white paper wedged under the wood lip. He used tweezers to pull it free. It was a price tag from an estate appraisal company. Savannah Legacy Valuations, item code SW12, no item description, no date printed, only a barcode and a handwritten number, 3800. Peter looked at me. Do you know this company? I shook my head. No. He took a photo, then placed it in a sleeve. A price tag hidden inside my desk. Another door. I called Iris before touching anything else. She answered on the second ring, and when I told her about Savannah Legacy Valuations, her tone sharpened. Do not call them yourself yet. Send me a photo. I'll check whether they are licensed and whether they have any record tied to your address, Maribel or Alden. I sent it. Peter and I kept searching. In the dining room cabinet, the silver service was all there, but one serving spoon had a tiny adhesive mark under the handle, the kind of residue a removed label might leave. Behind the sideboard, Peter found a crumpled tissue with a faint black smudge and another small tag stuck to it. Item code, SS7, handwritten number, 1150. My mother's silver serving spoon. $1,150, as if Sunday dinners and Christmas gravy could be converted into a tidy line item. In the hallway, behind the framed watercolor Daniel bought from a street artist on our 30th anniversary trip, there was a blue painter's tape mark on the back corner. Someone had removed the painting from the wall and replaced it slightly crooked. I had not noticed. Peter did. He lifted it down carefully. On the back was another sticker, Art 3, 900. By 10:30, we had found 9 tags or tag residues. Desk, silver spoon, watercolor, Daniel's railroad pocket watch box, a pair of brass candlesticks from my grandmother, the mahogany sideboard, a small marble top table near the stairs, 2 framed photographs, not because the photographs were valuable, but because the antique frames were. Every discovery felt less shocking and more exhausting. Shock is sharp at first, then it becomes a weight. Peter stopped in the hallway after finding a tag under the marble table and leaned one hand against the wall. She walked through here pricing everything, he said. His voice broke on everything. I looked around at the rooms where my children had learned to walk, fought over toys, opened Christmas stockings, slammed doors, came home from college, brought spouses, handed me grandchildren, and eventually began seeing old things as available things. No, I said. They did. Maribel may have wanted the story. Alden knew the market. Peter nodded slowly. He no longer tried to keep his sister separate from the act. Progress can be a terrible kind of clarity, Iris called back just after 11. Savannah Legacy Valuations is real, she said. Small appraisal firm. Owner is Graham Pell. Their website lists Alden Cross as a former referral partner. Former referral partner. Elegant words again. I called from my office and asked whether they had performed any valuation at your address. They would not disclose without client permission, which is proper. Then I asked whether they had any record under Maribel Whitaker Cross or Alden Cross tied to a heritage fund. They said they would need to consult counsel. That usually means yes. I closed my eyes. What now? I'm sending them a preservation letter and requesting all records. Detective Riley will also contact them. Photograph every tag and do not remove residue unless necessary. We need to know whether these valuations were part of the fake foundation, a sale plan, or both. Both, I said before I could stop myself. Iris was quiet for a moment. Likely, she said. At noon, Detective Riley called Peter, not me, because I had asked him to copy my son on procedural updates but not emotional ones. Peter put him on speaker. The detective had spoken with Alden's office. Alden had not agreed to an interview yet. His attorney had contacted the department. Maribel's attorney had also surfaced. That meant the family story had left the dinner table and entered the hallway of consequences. Detective Riley, said Mr. Sato, the gem dealer, had provided written communication showing Alden offered the loose sapphire as family-owned estate stone removed from damaged setting. I looked at the photograph of my ring, perfectly intact except for the theft they created. Alden had made the injury and then used the injury as description. Detective Riley also said the first review of Foundation emails showed Alden and Maribel discussing asset sequencing. Peter repeated the phrase with disgust. Asset sequencing? Detective Riley answered. Looks like a staged plan. Jewelry first, then smaller antiques, then potential trust discussion around the property. Jewelry first, antiques, property. My life arranged like steps on a ladder. That was when my doorbell rang. Peter and I froze. No one was expected. The sound echoed through the hallway, ordinary and terrifying. Peter went to the side window first and looked out. His jaw tightened. It's Maribel. My whole body went cold. Is Alden with her? No, she's alone. The bell rang again, followed by a soft knock, not demanding, not like Claire in Another Story, soft. That frightened me more. Maribel understood performance. She understood the power of looking broken at the right door. Peter looked at me. Do you want me to tell her to leave? I thought of Iris saying not to speak without counsel. I thought of Detective Riley on speaker, silent now but still connected. I thought of my wedding ring, the missing stone, the price tags, Daniel's note gone from the hidden drawer. Then I said, Detective, are you still there? His voice came through the phone. Yes, Mom. Can I speak through the door? You can. Do not let her in. Do not threaten. Do not argue. If she admits anything, note it. If you feel unsafe, call 911. I am already on the phone with a detective, I said. For the first time that day, Peter almost smiled. I went to the front door but left it locked. Through the glass panel, I could see Maribel standing on the porch in a pale blue blouse, hair loose, face bare of makeup. She looked smaller than she had at the auction, but I no longer trusted smallness as proof of truth. Mama, she said when she saw my shape behind the glass. Please, I need to talk to you before Alden makes this worse. Peter moved behind me, phone still recording. You can talk from there, I said. Her eyes flicked past me and saw him. Peter, don't do this, he answered before I could. Do what? Listen? She looked back at me, tears rising fast. Alden lied to me about the stone. I felt the words enter the hallway and arrange themselves carefully. Alden lied. Not I took, not we planned, I asked. Did you know he removed the sapphire? She pressed a hand to her mouth. Not before. Before what? She closed her eyes. Before the auction. The hallway went still. Not before the auction. Meaning she knew at the auction? Meaning she knew when I stood under stage lights asking about my ring? Peter whispered, Marie. She began crying harder. He said it was temporary. He said the original stone would be held as collateral for bridge funding, and the ring could still serve the heritage purpose with a replacement stone. He said no one would know. No one would know. There it was again, the motto of people who confuse secrecy with innocence. I held the doorframe to steady myself, and after he told you, I asked. I was already committed, she said. Charles had announced the recognition. The pledge materials were printed. I couldn't stop it without ruining everything. Everything, I repeated. By everything, do you mean my marriage ring or your place beside Charles Vinton? She flinched. That's not fair. No, I said. Fair was before you took the jewelry box. Her face changed. Anger pushed through the tears. You don't understand what it feels like to be invisible in rooms where people only respect old names and old money. Daniel's name opened doors. Your ring made them listen. Daniel's name, my ring, them. Listen. I felt a grief so sharp it almost became pity. Maribel had wanted power so badly she had mistaken her father's memory for a key left behind for her use. Your father's name was not yours to spend, I said. Her mouth trembled. I am his daughter. Then you should have known better than to sell the stone he chose for his wife. She stepped closer to the glass. I can get it back. It is already back. Her eyes widened. That was the first time I saw genuine surprise. What? Peter said. Mr. Sato turned it over. Armand verified it. Maribel looked as if the porch had shifted under her feet. Alden said it was safe. Safe for whom? I asked. She had no answer. Behind me, Detective Riley's voice came through Peter's phone. Mrs. Whitaker, ask her about the valuations. Peter lifted the phone slightly so she could hear. Maribel's eyes snapped to it. Who is that? Detective Riley, I said. We are documenting. Her face went white. Mama. Did you have my belongings appraised by Savannah Legacy Valuations? I asked. She looked away. That was answer enough, but I waited. Maribel, she whispered. Alden arranged it. Did you allow him into my house for that purpose? I thought it was preliminary. Preliminary to what? She started crying again, but this time the tears did not move me. Tears had become weather. I needed geography. Preliminary to what? I repeated. Finally, she said, to see what could support the foundation if you agreed. If I agreed, I said. Did you plan to ask me before or after my ring was already on Celia Vinton's hand? She covered her face. I don't know anymore. I do, I said. After, Peter took one step forward. Did you take Dad's anniversary note? Maribel looked at him through the glass and something broke in her face. I needed it for the donor story. Peter's voice shook. You took Dad's note to Mom and gave it to strangers? Not strangers, she said reflexively. Then she heard herself and stopped. I felt my knees weaken, but I did not sit. Where is it? I asked. Alden has it. Or Charles's office. I don't know. My private note. Daniel's words about joy and the blue ring passed between hands as donor material. I had thought the missing sapphire was the deepest theft. I was wrong. Stones can be recovered. A private sentence, once used by strangers, is harder to bring home clean. Detective Riley's voice came through again, firmer now. Mrs. Whitaker, ask her if she will provide a written statement. I repeated it. Maribel looked frightened. Against Alden? About everything, I said. Against lies. She stared at me. If I do that, he'll ruin me. He helped you ruin me first. The sentence came out colder than I expected. Maribel sobbed once, a raw sound, then stepped back from the door. I'll talk to Iris, she said. Today, I replied. Not after you speak to Alden. Not after you call Charles. Not after you decide which truth costs less. Today. She nodded, wiping her face. Mama, do you hate me? The question struck the mother in me so hard I had to close my eyes. When I opened them, I chose honesty over comfort. No, I said, but I do not trust the daughter who came to my porch today. And love without trust does not open the door. She looked at me through the glass for another moment, then turned and walked down the steps. When her car pulled away, Peter lowered the phone. Detective Riley said he would document the conversation and coordinate with Iris. Peter ended the call and stood in the hallway, pale and shaking. She knew before the auction, he said. Yes, she took Dad's note for a donor story. Yes. She let Alden appraise your things. Yes. 3 yeses, each one a stone. Peter sat on the bottom stair and put his head in his hands. I stood by the door, feeling the house behind me. Desk, watch, silver, photographs, gardenias, empty ring box, missing note. My daughter had finally admitted pieces, but the whole picture still had shadows. Alden had the note, or Charles's office did. Savannah Legacy had valuations. The foundation board had donor materials. The contractor had property estimates. There were rooms my grief had entered without me. Iris called 40 minutes later. Maribel had contacted her office and agreed to come in with counsel the next morning to give a statement. Iris's voice was cautious. This may be self-protection, not remorse. I know, I said, but self-protection can still produce documents. Exactly. She also told me Detective Riley had secured the sapphire as evidence and was preparing to request records from Alden's business. The case is shifting toward coordinated financial exploitation and attempted fraud connected to charitable solicitation. The words were large, legal, heavy. They should have made me feel vindicated. Instead, I felt tired, very tired. There is a particular exhaustion in learning that people you fed at your table had been sitting there imagining categories for your belongings. That evening, after Peter left, I went to the front parlor and opened the secretary desk. The hidden drawer sat empty, except for the safe deposit copy and the small key. Daniel's note should have been there. I ran my fingers along the wood, remembering the weekend he wrote it. We had stayed in a small Charleston hotel with uneven floors and a balcony barely large enough for 2 chairs. It rained the whole time. Daniel bought pralines, burned his tongue on coffee, and told me the sapphire looked darker in stormlight. On the last morning, he left the note on my pillow while I was brushing my hair. Pass it only with joy. That sentence had never meant charity, foundation, pledge, estate liquidity, or symbolic value. It meant, do not let grief decide too soon. It meant, keep love until keeping hurts more than giving. It meant, your hand, your choice. I closed the drawer and sat at the desk. Then I opened my notebook and wrote, Maribel admitted the stone was collateral, the house was preliminary, and Daniel's note was donor material. Under it, I wrote the question that would carry us into the next day. What did Alden promise Charles Vinton with my husband's words? The answer came sooner than I expected. At 9:37 that night, Iris forwarded an email she had just received from Charles Vinton's attorney. Attached was a scanned copy of a donor story draft prepared for the Caraway House Gala program. The title at the top read, A Love Story Preserved, Daniel Whitaker's Final Wish. My hands went numb. Daniel's final wish. I opened the document. There, in quotation marks, was a line from his missing note, edited, shortened, and twisted. When the ring no longer comforts you, pass it on with joy. Beneath it, the draft claimed I had chosen to honor Daniel by turning family heirlooms into a preservation fund for historic homes. I stared at the screen, unable to breathe properly. Maribel had not only stolen the note, someone had rewritten my husband's private love into public permission. And tomorrow, in Iris Caldwell's office, my daughter would have to say whether that someone was her. I slept badly that night, if what I did could be called sleep at all. I drifted in and out of dreams where Daniel's handwriting kept changing, where the words pass it on with joy crawled across auction programs, donor plaques, legal forms, and the white walls of my own bedroom until I woke with my heart beating too fast and the taste of metal in my mouth. At dawn I rose and opened the hidden drawer of the secretary desk again. As if grief might have returned the note while I was not looking, the drawer was empty except for the safe deposit key and the faint dust outline where the folded paper had rested for years. I touched that outline with one finger. It was almost foolish, I know, to mourn a piece of paper when the sapphire had been found, when the ring setting was secure, when Iris and Detective Riley were gathering proof. But that note was Daniel's voice in a room after his voice was gone. The ring was love made visible. The note was love made specific. Maribel had taken both, and Alden had learned how to turn one into money and the other into permission. That was the part I could not forgive in the dark hours before morning. They had not merely stolen from me. They had tried to make Daniel testify against me. Peter arrived at 8:30, this time with no coffee, no tools, no notebook, only himself and a face that had finally stopped asking me to comfort it. He stood in the doorway and said, "I read the donor draft Iris sent." I nodded. So did I. "Mom, I'm sorry." I looked at him sharply enough that he corrected himself before I spoke. "No, not just sorry, I'm angry. And I'm going to tell Iris everything I remember about Alden talking about Dad's note." That was better. Sorry collapses inward if it has nowhere to go. Anger, properly aimed, can carry a box of documents into the light. We sat at the dining table, the printed donor story draft between us. The title alone made me feel ill. A love story preserved, Daniel Whitaker's final wish. Under it was a cropped photograph of Daniel and me at the museum fundraiser, my ring visible, Daniel's hand on my back. The draft spoke of my decision to transform private family heirlooms into public heritage, of my desire to see Daniel's love live on through restoration, of the Whitaker Heritage Fund as if it already existed. Then came the stolen line from his note, edited just enough to remove my choice and keep their purpose. "When the ring no longer comforts you, pass it on with joy." They had cut away the word only. Daniel had written, "Pass it only with joy." Only was the guardrail, only was the condition. Only meant not under pressure, not under theft, not under a daughter's ambition or a son-in-law's liquidity plan. They removed only, and the whole sentence changed direction. Iris called at 9 and told us to come early. "Maribel is arriving with her attorney at 10:30, she said. "Alden's attorney has declined voluntary attendance, which tells us something." Charles Vinton's counsel sent more materials overnight, including emails where Alden edited the donor story draft. I closed my eyes. He edited Daniel's words? Yes. And Maribel commented on the edits. The kitchen seemed to tilt. Peter put one hand flat on the table. "What did she say?" Iris paused, and I knew she hated having to answer. She wrote, "Keep the line emotional but not too personal. Mama gets possessive about Dad's private notes." For a moment I could not speak. Possessive. About my dead husband's private note to me. Possessive, as if I were hoarding a public resource instead of protecting a sentence written on a hotel pillow before dawn. Peter stood so quickly his chair scraped the floor. "I'm going to be sick," he said, and walked into the hallway. I stayed seated because my knees did not trust me. "Iris," I said, "print that email." Her voice softened. "Already done." The meeting took place in Iris Caldwell's conference room, a square room with tall windows and a view of oak branches moving softly over the street. I sat beside Iris with Peter behind me, not at the table because Iris said his statement might be taken separately. Maribel arrived with an attorney named Simon Vale, a thin man with a narrow tie and tired eyes that suggested he had spent the morning explaining the difference between confession and strategy. Maribel wore a cream blouse and gray skirt. No silver dress, no staged glamour, no donor table shine. Her face was bare, almost swollen from crying, but I did not let that become evidence of anything except distress. Tears do not identify the victim. Sometimes they come from the person finally trapped by her own paper trail. She looked at me and whispered, "Mama." I did not answer. Iris began. "Maribel, you asked to provide a statement. Before you speak, understand this meeting is documented. Mrs. Whitaker is not here to negotiate family forgiveness. She is here to recover property, correct false records, and understand what was done in her name." Maribel nodded. Her attorney placed a hand near her arm, not touching her. "My client wants to cooperate," he said. Iris looked at him. "Then she should start with the note." Maribel's eyes filled immediately. "I took it from the desk," she said. "No long preface, no story about safekeeping. Just those 6 words. I felt them land in my chest." "When?" Iris asked. "The same day I took the jewelry box." "Why?" Maribel looked at me, then down at her hands. "Because I remembered what Dad wrote about the ring. I thought it would help explain the tribute." "The tribute?" Iris repeated. "Or the unauthorized pledge?" Maribel swallowed. "The pledge." Simon shifted in his chair but did not interrupt. Good. Perhaps he had learned already that stopping every ugly truth only made the next one louder. "Who saw the note?" Iris asked. "Alden. Charles, Denise at the foundation. Maybe Charles's communications person." My stomach turned. Private had become a list of strangers. "Did you give them the original?" Maribel hesitated. Alden scanned it. "Where is the original?" "I don't know." Peter made a sound behind me. I did not turn. Iris leaned forward. "Maribel, I think Alden kept it with the asset file," she said quickly. "Asset file." Daniel's love note had been placed in an asset file. I wrote the phrase in my mind because I knew if I wrote it with my hand, the pen might tear the paper. Then Iris placed the donor draft on the table. Did you comment? Keep the line emotional but not too personal. Mama gets possessive about Dad's private notes. Maribel closed her eyes. Yes. What did you mean? I meant she would not want it used. Then you knew she did not consent. Silence. Answer, Iris said. Maribel opened her eyes and looked at me. Yes, she whispered. The room became very still. There are confessions that bring relief and confessions that simply confirm the wound is as deep as you feared. This one was the second kind. I looked at my daughter and saw a woman who had known exactly where my boundary was because she had named it before crossing. She knew I would not want Daniel's note used. She knew I would not donate the ring. She knew I would not authorize the pledge. She knew I would not place my house into a charitable trust. Her entire plan had been built not from misunderstanding, but from anticipated refusal. Iris moved to the ring. When did you learn the sapphire had been removed? Maribel's hands began trembling. Before the auction. How long before? 2 days. Peter stepped closer behind me. Iris continued, voice even. What did Alden tell you? That the original stone could be used as short-term collateral. That the setting still had symbolic value with a replacement stone. That Celia would only wear it for the event, and then it could be restored. Did you believe him? I wanted to. That was not an answer, and Iris did not let it stand. Did you believe him? Maribel's face crumpled. No, not fully. Then why proceed? Maribel looked at me again, tears spilling now, because everything was printed. Charles had announced the recognition. The board expected the pledge. Alden said if I pulled back, I would look like a fraud. Iris's eyes hardened. Were you a fraud? Simon looked as if he might object, then thought better of it. Maribel covered her mouth. Yes, she said. By then, yes. Peter turned away, one hand at the back of his neck. I looked at the table. The truth was no longer hiding behind elegance. It was sitting there, ugly and smaller than the damage it caused. Then came the money. Iris placed the payment records from Armand's shop and the holding account documents in front of Maribel. The proceeds from the ring sale went to Cross Heritage Advisory, not directly to the foundation. Why? Maribel whispered. Alden said it was cleaner for pledge staging. Cleaner, Iris said. For whom? Maribel did not answer. Iris waited. For whom? For us, Maribel said. For me and Alden. The word us seemed to cost her. How much of the 12,000 went to the foundation? None yet. Where did it go? Maribel looked at Simon. He nodded slightly. To cover a debt Alden had with a private investor. He said it had to be repaid before the foundation pledge could move forward. Peter said, You sold Mom's ring to pay Alden's debt? His voice was shaking. Maribel turned toward him. I thought it was temporary. Everything is temporary when you're not the one being robbed, he said. The sentence stunned me because it sounded like Daniel, sharp and plain. Maribel began crying harder, but no one reached for the tissue box. Iris asked about the appraisals. Maribel admitted Alden arranged Savannah legacy valuations after she let him photograph the house and contents. She claimed she believed the valuations were preliminary donor planning, not a sale list. But when Iris produced the asset sequencing email, Maribel went silent. The email listed phases. Phase 1, ring and portable jewelry. Phase 2, silver watch, selected antiques. Phase 3, donor trust structure tied to residence value. Under Maribel's own reply was the sentence, Mama will resist if the house appears too early. Lead with Daniel's legacy. I heard Peter inhale sharply. Iris pushed the page closer. Did you write that? Maribel stared at it. Yes, explain it. She did not. She could not. So I did, quietly. It means you knew the house was the real target, and my husband was the doorway. Maribel looked as if I had slapped her. Mama, I know, I said. Iris let me speak. You used your father's name because you knew I still trusted it. You used my ring because people respect a widow's sacrifice. You used charity because it made greed look clean. You used Alden's language because liquidity sounds better than theft. And you used Peter's silence because he had been practicing it for years. Peter bowed his head. Maribel sobbed once. I'm sorry. I looked at her for a long time. Sorry is what people say when the room finally sees the stain. By noon, Maribel had signed a written preliminary statement. Not the final legal correction, Iris said, but enough to move fast. She acknowledged taking the ring without my authorization, selling it through Armand's shop, allowing the stone swap after learning of it, using Daniel's note without consent, participating in donor story drafts, submitting or supporting the False Heritage Fund pledge, and allowing Alden to arrange preliminary valuations of my belongings and house. She claimed Alden directed the financial structuring, removed the sapphire, held the proceeds, and controlled Cross Heritage Advisory. She agreed to provide all emails, texts, access credentials, donor drafts, asset lists, and communications with Alden and Charles Vinton's circle. She also agreed to cooperate in recovering Daniel's original note. That mattered most to me in that moment. The sapphire had been found. The money could be traced. The pledge could be killed. But Daniel's note was still out there, maybe in Alden's office, maybe scanned into some file labeled asset, maybe lying on a desk where strangers had touched it with coffee-stained fingers. When Maribel stood to leave, she looked smaller than she had when she entered. She turned to me. "Mama, can I say one thing?" Iris looked at me. The choice was mine. I nodded once. Maribel swallowed. Alden made me feel like Dad's memory could finally become something important. I felt a deep, sad anger rise in me. "Your father's memory was already important," I said. "You wanted it to become impressive." She flinched. "Yes," she whispered. "I think I did." That was perhaps the first sentence in which she did not try to make herself less guilty. Not enough, but clean. She left with Simon Vale, and the room seemed to exhale after the door closed. Peter gave his statement next. He admitted what he knew and when he knew it. That Maribel took the jewelry box, that she mentioned I was too sentimental about estate pieces, that Alden had asked about insurance, that Peter had noticed Maribel photographing the parlor once but accepted her explanation about cataloging family history, that he had heard her say I might resist if the house came up too soon, that he did not warn me because, in his words, I was used to letting Maribel sound certain. Iris asked, "Do you understand the effect of that?" Peter looked at me. "Yes, it made my mother easier to use." That sentence went into the record. It did not heal us, but it told the truth without decoration. The afternoon brought consequences faster than I expected. Detective Riley, using Maribel's statement and Mr. Sato's preserved communications, obtained further records connected to Alden's offer of the sapphire. Cross Heritage Advisory's account was flagged. Charles Vinton's attorney confirmed the foundation pledge was void, and that all donor materials using Daniel's note or my name would be destroyed or turned over. Savannah Legacy Valuations provided its appraisal file, claiming Alden had represented himself as acting for the Whitaker family. Lowcountry Heritage Renovations sent its estimate records, showing Alden asked how elder residents' assets could support a preservation trust. Elder residents' assets. My house, again stripped of porch, kitchen, gardenias, Daniel's repaired rail, Peter's childhood handprints in old cement by the back step. Language can be theft's first disguise. At 4:40, Detective Riley called Iris while Peter and I were still in her office. Iris put him on speaker. "We located Daniel's note," he said. My hand flew to my mouth. "Where?" Iris asked. "Alden's office, in a file labeled Whitaker Legacy Assets. We have a scan in the original. It will be held as evidence for now, but it is intact." Intact. I closed my eyes, and the room blurred with tears for the first time since the auction. Not because everything was fixed, because Daniel's words had survived the strangers. Detective Riley continued. "We also found a draft pledge schedule listing additional assets with estimated values. Gold watch, silver service, antique desk, framed art, and a proposed residence trust discussion after donor recognition event. Donor recognition event. That meant the auction was only the first act. Publicly honor me, display the ring, announce the pledge, print Daniel's note, secure sympathy, then approach me afterward with enough social pressure that refusal would make me appear selfish, confused, or cruel." I opened my eyes. "Detective," I said, voice shaking. "Will that be in the report?" "Yes, Mom," he said, "all of it." That evening, I did not go home immediately. I asked Peter to drive me to the river. We parked near the walkway where Daniel and I used to stroll when his knees were still good, watching cargo ships move slowly through the water like patient buildings. The sky had turned pink and gray, and the air smelled of salt, mud, and fried food from a restaurant nearby. Peter walked beside me without speaking. That too was progress. At a bench facing the river, I sat down and finally let myself cry. Not loudly, not long, but fully. I cried for the ring, the stone, the note, the daughter who wanted importance more than honesty, the son who had learned courage late, the husband whose private tenderness had been dragged through donor drafts, and the older woman I had become, sitting by the water with legal papers in her purse. Peter stood a few steps away until I reached for his hand. Only then did he sit beside me. "I don't know if I can forgive her," he said. I wiped my face. "That is not the first question. What is? Whether she can become someone who stops needing forgiveness for the same kind of harm." He nodded slowly. The river moved on, indifferent and steady. Alden was questioned the next day. He denied theft, of course. Men like Alden do not steal, they structure. They do not sell, they unlock value. They do not exploit widows, they preserve legacy. Through his attorney, he claimed Maribel authorized all asset planning as a family representative, that the sapphire was temporarily separated to secure short-term funding, and that the property trust was exploratory. But the records had begun surrounding him. Mr. Sato had his messages. Armand had the ring records. Savannah Legacy had valuation requests. Charles Vinton had donor drafts. Maribel had signed a statement. Daniel's note was found in Alden's asset file. The $12,000 from the ring had entered Cross Heritage Advisory and moved toward an investor debt. Detective Riley could not tell me everything, but Iris said the case was now serious. Will he be charged? I asked. Likely, she said. Maribel? Iris paused. Also possible, cooperation may matter, but she participated. I looked toward my window where gardenia leaves shone after rain. My daughter might face charges. I had thought those words would feel impossible. They felt terrible. They also felt like the natural end of a road she chose while knowing I would say no. The protective order came 2 days later. Iris petitioned to bar Maribel and Alden from contacting me directly, entering my property, accessing my accounts, handling or appraising my belongings, using my name, Daniel's name, my image, my house, or any family documents in connection with donations, trusts, foundations, sales, loans, pledges, or public materials. Alden was also barred from disposing of any assets connected to the Whitaker matter. Maribel's attorney did not fight the temporary order. Alden's did and lost. The judge, a weary man named Harold Tinsley, looked over the documents and said, "A tribute without consent is not tribute. It is appropriation." I wrote that down as soon as I got home. A tribute without consent is not tribute. It was the sentence I wished someone had spoken before my ring reached Celia's hand. The ring and sapphire remained in evidence for several months. During that time, my house became safer but not peaceful. Safety can be installed faster than peace. I changed locks. I moved the safe deposit box. I updated bank permissions. I photographed every valuable item. I placed Daniel's watch, my mother's silver, and the antique desk papers under new protections. Peter helped, but only when asked. Sometimes I asked. Sometimes I did not. He accepted both. Maribel wrote once through her attorney, "I am sorry I made Dad's love look like something I could manage." I read that sentence 3 times. It was not enough to open a door, but it was enough to place in a folder I labeled Maybe, which sat far from proof and closer than trash. The climax came in late autumn, in a courtroom smaller than I expected and colder than it needed to be. Alden accepted a plea agreement related to theft by deception and financial exploitation tied to the sapphire, ring proceeds, and fraudulent charitable materials. Maribel entered a separate agreement requiring restitution, formal correction of all donor records, cooperation against Alden, community service, and probation. Some people might have wanted prison for both. Some might have wanted public ruin. I wanted my ring whole, Daniel's note returned, my name cleared, and the record to say they had no right. The court gave me that much. Before sentencing, I was allowed to speak. I stood with Iris beside me, Peter behind me, Maribel at one table, Alden at the other. Alden looked smaller without his fine language. Maribel looked like my daughter and not like my daughter at all. I told the judge about the ring. Not its value, its life. Daniel buying it on payments, the engraving, the hospital rooms, the funeral, the velvet box. I told him about seeing it on Celia's hand while my name appeared on a pledge I never made. I told him about the missing sapphire, the stolen note, the donor draft that called my husband's private words a final wish. Then I looked at Alden and Maribel and said, "You tried to turn love into liquidity and memory into leverage. You called it preservation because theft sounded too honest." The courtroom was silent. I turned back to the judge. "I am not here because I hate my daughter. I am here because love without a boundary becomes something dishonest people can spend." Judge Tinsley looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Mrs. Whitaker, the record will reflect your statement. The record will reflect." 4 plain words. After months of lies, I had learned how beautiful plain words could be. When Armand finally restored my ring, he invited me to his shop after hours. Peter came with me. Celia Vinton came too, unexpectedly, carrying white roses and an apology she had already given but felt needed repeating. The original sapphire was reset into the gold band, the prongs were repaired, the tiny diamonds cleaned, the engraving inside remained. D to L 1976. Armand placed it on a velvet pad and stepped back. "It is yours again," he said. I looked at the ring for a long time before touching it. The sapphire caught the shop light, and there it was, the storm cloud, deep and imperfect and alive. I slipped it onto my finger slowly. My knuckle resisted, then allowed it. The familiar weight returned, but not the old innocence. That was gone. Still, recovered things can be true even after being harmed. I pressed the ring against my chest and whispered, "Hello, Daniel." Peter cried quietly beside me. I let him. The first morning I wore the restored ring again. I woke before sunrise and held my hand up in the gray light, like a young bride checking whether marriage had truly happened overnight. The sapphire looked darker before dawn, nearly black at the center, with a small blue fire waiting for the day to find it. I turned my hand slowly, watching the stone catch the faint light from the window. And for the first time since the auction, I did not see Celia Vinton's hand, Armand's evidence tray, Alden's asset file, or Maribel's face under stage lights. I saw Daniel standing in our first apartment in 1976 with a brown paper bag from the jeweler, and a grin he tried to hide because he thought surprise was more dignified if it arrived quietly. I saw him opening the box and saying, "It isn't much, Lenora, but it's real." That had always been Daniel's highest praise for anything. Real, not impressive, not perfect, not expensive enough to silence a room. Real. The ring was real again, but I was not foolish enough to believe restoration meant erasure. The gold still had the history of being stolen. The sapphire had survived being pried out and offered to strangers. Daniel's note had been copied, edited, and placed in a file where love was treated as donor language. The ring came home, but it came home with a record. Daniel's original note was returned to me 2 weeks after the sentencing, sealed in a clear sleeve because it had been evidence. I received it in Iris Caldwell's office, not at home, because I wanted the moment to have witnesses who understood that paper can bleed without showing red. Iris placed the sleeve on the table and said, "You do not have to open it here." Peter sat beside me, hands folded tightly, looking at the note with the same grief I felt. I opened the sleeve anyway. The hotel stationery was softer than I remembered, its fold lines worn, Daniel's square handwriting still steady across the page. "Lenora, if I leave first, keep the blue ring on as long as it comforts you, and when it stops comforting you, pass it only with joy. Only." The stolen word was there, still guarding the sentence. I pressed my fingers lightly over the page without touching the ink. For months, strangers had used that line as if it belonged to legacy, charity, preservation, and social ambition. But the note had never been about legacy in the public sense. It was about permission from one spouse to another. Keep love as long as it helps you live, and do not let anyone turn grief into obligation. I read it once silently, then aloud. My voice broke on joy. Peter looked away, crying. Iris, who had remained professionally steady through everything, removed her glasses and looked toward the window. I did not put the note back in the secretary desk. That hiding place had been spoiled, at least for now. Instead, I placed it in a small archival folder Iris recommended, made 2 certified copies, and wrote a new instruction in my own hand. "This note is private. It may not be used in any donor material, family story, public tribute, sale, pledge, foundation, trust, or memorial project without my written consent while I am alive." It felt absurd at first, writing legal boundaries around a love note. Then I remembered Maribel's email. "Mama gets possessive about Dad's private notes." Possessive, she had called me. So yes, I became possessive in ink. There are things an older woman should possess without apology. Her name, her home, her memories, her rings, her letters, her no. Maribel did not come to my house after sentencing. She was not allowed to without permission, and I did not give it. She sent one letter through her attorney a month later. Iris reviewed it first, then asked if I wanted to read it. I waited 3 days. Some people think waiting means weakness, but waiting had become one of my strongest tools. It kept other people's urgency from becoming my command. When I finally opened the letter at my kitchen table, I noticed Maribel had written by hand. Her handwriting looked less elegant than usual, the lines uneven, the ink darker where she had pressed hard. She wrote that Alden had moved out, that the marriage was ending, that she had begun community service at an elder legal clinic as required, and that for the first time she had sat across from women who sounded like me. I heard one woman say her nephew called it family planning when he took her savings, she wrote. I wanted to disappear. I sat with that sentence for a while. Shame can be useful if it teaches the right lesson. It can also become another performance. I kept reading. Near the end, she wrote, I wanted Dad's memory to make me important because I did not believe I was enough without being seen beside important people. I stole from you because I had already convinced myself your love would survive whatever I did. That line made me close my eyes. It was not an excuse. It was worse and better than an excuse. It was a truth I recognized. Children often trust a mother's love most dangerously when they assume it has no edges. I did not answer that letter. Not then. I placed it in a folder labeled Maybe, the same kind of folder I had once mocked other women for keeping when they could not decide what to do with old birthday cards and difficult memories. Maybe did not mean forgiveness. It meant I was not willing to let anger make every future decision for me. It also meant I was not willing to let pity open the door before trust had learned to walk. Peter saw the folder one Sunday afternoon when he came to repair the loose latch on the back gate. He looked at the label and said, Maybe, I said. It is a strong word when used properly. He smiled sadly. Dad would have liked that. Your father liked anything that prevented foolishness from moving too fast, I replied. And for the first time in months, We laughed about Daniel without the laugh breaking apart. Petter and I rebuilt in smaller, steadier ways. He came by on Sundays but only after calling, he asked before entering rooms. He no longer explained Maribel to me unless I asked, and most days I did not ask. He brought groceries once, and when I told him I had not requested groceries, he apologized and took them back to his car without making me feel cruel. The next week he called from the store and asked, "Would you like anything?" That difference might sound tiny to someone who has never had help used as a disguise, but to me it was the difference between a hand extended and a hand closing. One afternoon, while we sorted the photographs that had been copied for the donor packet, Peter found the original museum fundraiser photo of Daniel and me. In the unauthorized draft, they had cropped it so Daniel's hand, my ring, and our smiling faces supported the story they wanted. In the original, Peter was visible at the edge, 22 years old, laughing at something outside the frame, and Maribel stood beside him in a green dress, looking bored because the speeches had run long. "They cut us out," Peter said. "No," I answered. "They cut context out. That became another lesson." Manipulation often begins by cropping the picture. The Vinton Foundation issued a formal correction in December. Charles Vinton's attorney wrote most of it, I'm sure, but Iris insisted on plain language. The statement said the foundation had voided the unauthorized pledge connected to the proposed Whitaker Heritage Fund, that I had not authorized any donation, ring sale, heirloom liquidation, donor story, use of Daniel Whitaker's private writing, or property-backed trust discussion, and that future donor materials would require direct verification from the named donor. Charles sent a private apology too. I read it once. He wrote that he had been captivated by the emotional power of the story and failed to verify consent. Captivated. That word stayed with me. It was a polite admission of vanity. People wanted the story of the noble widow giving her ring for preservation. They liked it so much they forgot to ask the widow if it was true. I sent one reply through Iris. Beautiful stories still require permission. Charles did not answer, which was wise. Armand Jules became, unexpectedly, a friend. Not a close friend in the way of casseroles and birthdays, but the kind of friend who exists because he stood at the right moment and said, "This feels wrong." Every few months, I took the ring to his shop for cleaning, though it did not need it that often. He would examine the prongs, polish the gold lightly, and hand it back with both hands. "Still yours," he would say. The first time he said that, I cried in his shop between a tray of pearl earrings and a locked case of estate bracelets. After that, he said it more quietly. Celia Vinton came once while I was there, and for a moment we stood awkwardly on opposite sides of the counter, two women connected by a ring neither of us had meant to harm. She apologized again. I told her she had already done what mattered. She returned it, she cooperated, and she did not pretend her embarrassment was larger than my loss. She nodded, then said, "I don't wear estate jewelry anymore unless I know the story." "Good," I said. "Make sure the story includes the woman who owned it." In January, I spoke at the Savannah Senior Center, though I resisted when Iris first suggested it. I did not want to become a cautionary tale in sensible shoes. I did not want my husband's ring to become educational material. But then Iris told me about a widow whose niece had used downsizing to remove silver from her dining room, and another woman whose son had placed her paintings in an auction, temporarily. I thought of Daniel's note in Alden's asset file. I thought of the fake donor story titled A Love Story Preserved. I agreed to speak for 10 minutes. The room was full of older women, a few older men, and several adult children who looked either concerned or nervous, depending on their intentions. I held up my left hand and said, "This ring was stolen from me by someone who loved me, and someone who knew how to price love. Those are different dangers, and sometimes they work together." No one moved. I told them to photograph valuables, keep appraisals outside the house, lock private letters, require written consent for donations, and never allow the word legacy to rush them past the word permission. If someone says they are preserving your story, I told them, ask why they need your signature after the story is already printed. A woman in the second row began crying quietly. Afterward, she asked for Iris's card. Maribel completed her community service in spring. Her attorney forwarded proof, along with another letter. This one was shorter. She wrote, "I am learning that shame made me hungry for rooms where I could feel important. I used your grief to buy entry. I will spend the rest of my life knowing that." I sat with that line for nearly a week before replying. My response was brief, written by hand, copied by Iris, and sent through proper channels. "Maribel, I believe you are beginning to tell the truth. That matters. It does not restore trust. Trust will not be discussed until you can respect a closed door without calling it cruelty. Your mother." I signed it Lenora first, then crossed it out and wrote your mother. Both were true. I was still her mother. I was also Lenora, The woman she had tried to turn into an elder donor with assets. The first time I agreed to see her in person was not at my house. It was at Bonaventure Cemetery, near Daniel's grave on a warm April morning when azaleas bloomed in reckless pink around the old stones. Peter came, but waited near the path. Iris knew the meeting was happening. Maribel arrived alone, wearing a plain linen dress and flat shoes, carrying nothing in her hands. I noticed that. No flowers, no envelope, no symbolic object. Good. She stopped a few feet away from me and Daniel's headstone. For a while, neither of us spoke. Birds called from the trees. Somewhere far off, a tour guide was telling visitors about famous graves, turning death into history for people with cameras. Finally, Maribel said, "I don't know how to stand here." I looked at Daniel's name carved in stone. Start by standing without using him. She nodded, tears filling her eyes, but she did not reach for me. I used to think Dad's quietness meant there was unused importance in him, she said. Like if I could attach his name to something big, people would finally see what he was. I turned to her. Your father did not need strangers to make him larger. She lowered her head. I know. No, I said, not cruelly. You are learning. Knowing takes longer. She accepted that. A year earlier, she would have argued. That day, she let the correction stand. She asked if I ever thought I could forgive her. I had known the question would come, and this time I had an answer shaped by months of anger, paper, courtrooms, and the weight of the restored ring. I am working on a kind of forgiveness that keeps me from becoming bitter, I said. I am not working on a kind that gives you access, she cried then silently. I understand. Do you? I asked. I'm trying to. That was honest enough for that day. Before leaving, she looked at my hand. May I see it? My body tensed. She saw the tension and stepped back immediately. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked. That retreat, small and immediate, told me more than an apology. She had touched a boundary and withdrawn without punishment. I held up my hand from where I stood. She looked at the ring from a distance. It looks like him, she whispered. I glanced at the sapphire, deep and imperfect. No, I said softly. It looks like us. That summer, I made changes to the house, but by choice I repaired the upstairs bathroom tile. I moved Daniel's watch to a safe deposit box with clear instructions. I had the silver appraised by Armand and insured properly, not because I planned to sell it, but because knowing a value is different from becoming a value. I moved the antique desk to a brighter wall in the parlor and placed a small card inside the hidden drawer. Family secrets should be harmless and well-made. Daniel's old line. Beneath it, I added my own, and never used without permission. Peter helped me hang the museum fundraiser photo in the hallway, the uncropped version. There we all were, Daniel and me smiling, Peter laughing at the edge, Maribel bored in green, the ring shining on my hand before any of us knew what it would one day survive. I kept it uncropped because I no longer trusted beautiful fragments. I wanted the whole picture, even the painful parts. When the anniversary of the auction came around, I did not hide from it. I put on a blue dress, the sapphire ring, and Daniel's watch, and I went to Armand's shop with Peter. Armand cleaned the ring and said, "Still yours." Then Peter drove me to the Magnolia Arts Center. There was no gala that night, only a small local photography exhibit, and a young woman at the front desk who did not know me. I stood in the back of the hall where I had first seen the ring on Celia's hand. The room smelled faintly of varnished wood and white wine. The stage was empty. No projection screen, no donor story, no applause built on a lie. Peter stood beside me, quiet. "Why did you want to come?" he asked. I looked toward the stage. Because I did not want the last version of me in this room to be the woman discovering theft. I walked to the stage steps, climbed them slowly, and stood where I had held the microphone. In the quiet hall, I said not loudly, I did not donate my life. Peter's eyes filled, but he smiled. "No," he said, "you didn't." Then we left. I am 75 now. The ring is on my hand as I write this. Though some days I take it off and place it in the velvet box because comfort should be chosen, not performed. Maribel and I are not healed in the way people like to imagine families heal in stories, she writes. Sometimes I answer, she has not been inside my house. Perhaps one day she will sit at my kitchen table again. Perhaps not. Peter knocks now always, even when his arms are full. Armand still checks the prongs. Iris keeps copies of everything. Detective Riley returned the original note, and it rests in a protected folder beside my own instructions. Daniel's words are private again, not because no one has seen them, but because the record now says they were taken without consent. That matters. The law cannot make something innocent again, but it can stop liars from calling it willing. And if you are listening to this as a woman who owns a ring, a house, a box of letters, a drawer full of old papers, a husband's watch, a mother's silver, or anything others call sentimental, because they do not know how to price the life inside it, please hear me clearly. Sentimental does not mean worthless. Legacy does not mean available. Family does not mean automatic permission. If someone wants to honor you, they should ask you before printing your name. If someone wants to preserve your story, they should not need to steal the object that carries it. Photograph your valuables. Keep appraisals and insurance records somewhere safe. Put private letters where ambition cannot reach them. Tell one trusted person what matters and why. And if a child, in-law, donor, consultant, or charming man with polished words says they are only protecting your legacy, ask the question that saved me. Whose legacy grows if my consent disappears? If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments where you are listening from, your age if you feel comfortable sharing it, and whether anyone has ever tried to turn your memories into money or your love into permission. Like this story, subscribe for more emotional family betrayal stories, and share it with someone who needs the courage to protect the things that still carry their name.